Good morning. My name is Gregorio, and welcome to the Power of Our Story, founded by Sarah Carell. Today, we have an amazing talk. We're going to kind of take a page out of Scott Duncan's book and talking about transition, what's next. Doug is a former NFL player who has transitioned from the NFL into civilian life. And I think that that's something that we typically think of in our own little bubbles as military or law enforcement, people that struggle with that transition out of that life. Failing to realize that athletes are very much the same. They've been doing these things since they were kids. It's their identity. It's all they've ever really known. And it's all they've really done for a large population of them. So those struggles are real as well. Doug Baldwin is the managing director of Vault 89 Ventures. He's a CEO of Ventrk and founder of the Family First Community Center Foundation. He's a philanthropic activist with a passion for creating empathic solutions for complex problems. As we know, there's many. As a recipient of the Martin Luther King Medal of Distinguished Service Award, the former Seattle Seahawk and Superbowl champion, Seahawks, is most importantly a devoted husband and a father. And again, I think that's where a lot of that identity stuff comes from. So, Doug, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you reading that bio, man. No, it's an honor to be here with you all, as I mentioned before, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So, can you tell me, Doug, can you start from the beginning? Like, how old were you when you started playing football, and when did that really kind of encapsulate and capture every moment of your waking life?
Yeah. So I actually started playing when I was 6 years old, and I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. So during the summer, it's very hot and humid, right? And as a 6-year-old, I didn't want to play. So I actually quit my first year. My mom, she allowed me to quit football the first year. But then my next year, when I was 7 years old, I asked to play again. And she said, okay, well, this time you can play, but you're not going to be able to quit. I wanted to quit again, and she wouldn't let me. And obviously the rest is history. Obviously some really valuable lessons in that journey. But for me, football didn't become kind of like my thing until my junior year in high school, I'll say. That's when I realized and felt like maybe I can make a career out of this and, take it somewhere. And obviously that was the case. So really fortunate for that. But along the way, obviously a lot of struggles, a lot of challenges, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of those in this conversation.
Outstanding. So when did you feel that you were kind of a standout guy, and how did that affect you and the bubble around you?
Well, I mean, there's multiple moments when this feeling of like, okay, maybe there's something more here for my football career, but then the responses to it took varying degrees. So for instance, my junior year in high, well, let me actually back up. Little League, right? Like we were the talk of the town for our Little League team. It was myself and Alfred Morris who actually made it to the NFL as well. And there was several other folks on our team who went to different colleges. And so we had a really, really good team. From 6 years old, well, I should say from 7 years old to 14 years old, so 7-year span, we won every state championship, every city championship except for one, right? You can imagine that's a really big deal for a Little League team. So it was that time where I kind of realized like, okay, maybe I am good at football. And so I was having this expectation that when I got to high school, that success would just continue. I had some struggles with injuries, and then, if I'm being honest, some maturity issues my sophomore year. And so I didn't really get to play that much. It was my junior year, I kind of caught fire, and then got some teams to look at me and recruit me. And then that was my opportunity to go and play in the college ranks. My senior year, I had a decent year, but I was pegged down with some injuries. I tore both labrums in my shoulder, had to have complete shoulder repairs. So went through that challenge. Then I got into college. I played a little bit my freshman year. So, again, those maturity issues started creeping up a little bit, thinking I'm bigger than what I was. Those came to bite me in my sophomore season and my junior season. I didn't get to play very much. I wasn't doing well in school. I wasn't doing well on the field. I was missing my family. I was really homesick. struggling mentally and physically in all the ways that you can imagine, right? And you got to think about, I was a kid from Pensacola, Florida, flew all the way across the country to California. So it was a culture shock for me. The things I was dealing with was, they're just new to me, right? And I didn't have a support system there in the physical location to help me through that. So I struggled. But came back my senior year, my mindset was I was just going to put my head down, survive it, try to do my best, be the best version of me that I could. And I did that. And I got an opportunity. The mindset, or what I was telling myself at that time, was like, look, I don't know if I'm going to have a chance to play. I don't know what's going to come of this, but at least I'm going to give myself an opportunity to be prepared if the opportunity was to come. And so I did that. And the first game of our season, my senior year, the two starting receivers in front of me, they got hurt. And so I had to play. In that game, I had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then that came back. That season was like, okay, maybe I'm back on track again. Maybe I could make something of this. But I learned my lesson, right? It's like to stay humble and to stay grounded and to continue to work, because those opportunities could be fleeting. I didn't get drafted, but then obviously had an opportunity to go play in the NFL as an undrafted free agent. Had some success my rookie season, struggled with injuries my second season, just because that game is a totally different game than college, but then picked it up from there and had a great career. And I will say, I think, as much as I want to tout my physical ability and also all the folks around me that supported me in this, I think one of the main things that helped me get through all the challenges was staying grounded, right? And that's not to say that I always did, but I look back on that time now, and staying grounded and humble through those experiences, I think helped propel me to have the success that I did.
That's fantastic, man. I love that story. If you don't mind, bro, I want to kind of dig into the guts of all this, kind of growing up to try to figure out why we end up struggling with these transitions when we change from something. So you talked about your mentality as a kid growing up. So as you start to end up finding that success and you end up having people around you kind of praising you, and you're kind of on this pedestal, what do you think that does for your mentality? And where I'm kind of going with that to go forward is, what is it? What's the percentage of people that make it to the NFL? Sub 1%?
Yeah, less than 1% of the population.
And I think that we're somewhere in that same thing as far as percentages of people that serve in the military. So in our own heads, if nothing else, we're kind of tip of the spear, small percentage of people that are actually doing what we're doing. And with the indoctrination of military stuff as well, I believe that as a Pee-wee guy myself, is all I really ever did. You kind of get filled with that hype and you kind of get indoctrinated with these things. What does that do for the mentality from your perspective as you're kind of growing up?
Yeah, I mean, as a child, I don't want to speak for everybody who goes through this experience, but for me personally, right, like I was, if I'm being honest, like I wasn't in a very healthy environment. It was at times a very unsafe environment. And so football was kind of my, number one, it was my avenue to get out of that environment. But number two, it became the way that I recognized, for me, my value in the world, right? And so when you have success in that realm, and then you have folks who are cheering you on and supporting you, and in some ways kind of idolizing you, even as a young kid, right? You don't know how to take that. You don't know how to handle that in a healthy manner. And I took that and spun it around to kind of idolize myself too, and I will say that I think, especially in that realm, and I assume this is in some ways in Chris, in your realm too, like you kind of have to have this invincibility complex, right? This God complex that you can do whatever you put your mind to. And if I'm being honest, it served me really, really well in those ranks. But I think we all know that once you leave that, that environment and that arena, it doesn't work the same, right? Like I was really good at physically imposing my will on another human being on the football field. I've got 3 daughters now. They tell me no all the time. So it's just a different realm. And that was really, really hard for me, because I think I was set up in that way. And, again, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think as humans, we're not made to to be idolized, right? We can't do it in a healthy way. And even obviously as a child, like there was consequences and repercussions that came from that.
Sure, man. And thank you for opening that up. It's deep. And I think that goes with that indoctrination. And to your point, I think that there's a certain amount of it that's healthy and has to be done to find that tip of the spear level, right?
Yeah.
For you to be able
to survive
compete.
Right.
That's it. And you said, can you speak a little bit more of you said that you got the value from all that stuff as a youngster growing up? And I don't think that it's just as youngsters, just from your perspective. I know I'm the same way, and I think a lot of people are the same way. You're finding your value from external sources, which kind of leads to, we don't really know who we are. We're trying to appease somebody or get something from somebody to validate who we think we might be rather than exactly who we are.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, like I have to speak about that environment and that culture that I grew up in, right? It was a really challenging environment for me as a child. And, I don't want to talk bad about my mom and dad because like they were just two flawed human beings trying to do the best that they could with what they had as well, right? So I don't want to get it misconstrued that I'm talking negatively about them. They had their challenges, just as I do as a father and a husband to this day. But it was a challenging environment, and I didn't necessarily get the love and attention that I think was conducive to being combative to this idolization that I got in the sports world, right? And so when I leaned into the sports world, that was how I got that affection and that attention, right? And that's what I placed my value on because it was so conditional. It was transactional. If I played well, I got the praise. And so I would continue to work to play well so that I would get that praise. And I know, in totality, in the grand scheme of things, I know that we all kind of experience that in some form, some shape or form. All of us do that. For whatever reason, it was just really, really critical for me. It was like oxygen. I needed it to survive. And so all of my motivation, everything that propelled me, I believe in the sports world, and even to this day, like it stems from that, right? I needed that validation that that I had value in the world. And football provided that for me. And so in some ways, it became my drug.
Perfect segue. So would you say that there's an addictive component to it?
Absolutely. That's not even a question. And, we're seeing it play out in other forms. Like if you look, I hate to make this analogy. It's not, I don't know if it's even an analogy, but social media, right? We all know the impacts of social media on our young folks today, right?
Yeah.
Social media is this driving force of them trying to get validation and affirmation of who they are in the world. And that's where a lot of folks, that's where their value comes from. I've got my little brother who's, he's 20 years old. He's so wrapped up in it, right? I've got a 17-year-old cousin and she's a 19-year-old second year in college now. Like she's struggling with it, right? And it's all the same components. It's like, you want to be valued and you want to be seen for yourself, for who you truly are, but then you put up this facade because you want people to like that facade, but then behind that facade is the real person, and there's a disconnect, and that disconnect wreaks havoc on our mental and spiritual and all of the things of our well-being, right? And I think that's also why we see a lot of issues with our young folks, including suicide rates, right? Because they're looking for this validation that's not going to come in the form of sustainability through social media or through any other aspects. Now, there's, I could take this a whole different realm, but I don't want to get long-winded here. But
Please do.
The point is that that validation, that affirmation that we're seeking from a place that is never going to suffice that need, that's a void that, yes, can become an addiction because you're always trying to fill that up, and it never suffices. So yeah, I 100%.
And the reason I asked that, and thank you for that perspective, is that I think that that's one of the big deals with people transitioning. And I know I said it before the call, but I'll say it here now that we're recording. When you've done something your entire life, I don't care if you've been in corporate America, you've been a military, first responder, whatever, that's all you've ever known. And you've exactly right. I think that you end up putting on this facade and you might lose who you are. So you don't even know who that is. And you're chasing this thing and you're up here at this level. And then you transition to something next, whatever's next for you. And there's no way almost that you can start off at that same level. You're stepping down somewhere to start over.
Yeah.
And so you're chasing that addictive, that praise, the validation. So in that, where do you think does that get lost? Where we kind of, well, I guess I'll ask you this. At what point did you figure out, because I'm still working on it for me, who you are? You're not the NFL player. You're not just the CEO. When did you figure out, and for me, I'll say the word is maturity. When did you find that moment where you're like, oh, this is who I am? Because when we walk away from these things, and at some point, Corey's no longer going to be a cop, I'm no longer going to be a soldier, then what are you then? If that's all you are, if that's what you are identifying with, then what are you if you're not finding that?
It is a beautiful question. And I think the truthful answer from my perspective is that I'm still figuring that out. I think more so than anything through this journey and through this process, I'm learning more of what I'm not, more so than what I am, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why that's the case is because, you know, to your point, like for several years, especially in this entertainment business, I put up this facade of what I thought I was supposed to be, what the world was expecting of me, right? And not necessarily who I truly was. Now, there was some aspect of me in that, right? My competitive nature, my tenacity, that fierceness, like that's all still there to this day. And I still value that. But, you know, how I wanted to present myself to the media or to the fans, right? Like there's always a sense of trying to perform for them as well. And there was just some aspects of that I didn't want to do anymore. And I didn't want to be a part of, right? Like, you know, and I know fans don't mean it this way, but when people come up to me and they don't even introduce themselves, they don't even say hello, they just like take out their phone and want to take a picture, right? I know for some folks, it's like, you know, that's a great, cool experience and, you know, whatever it may be for them. But for me, it was like, I wanted more of a connection, right? Because my affirmation and value had been so tied to this performance. And now as I was getting away from that, I didn't want anything to do with that. I just wanted a genuine, real, true connection. And so I hated when people would just take out their phone and take pictures, right? It's like, I'm not a zoo animal. I'm a human being. Treat me like a human being. Introduce yourself. Let's have a conversation, right? Like, so that's like, that's what I've learned. Like, I don't want to be I'm not that, right? I don't want to be that. So I'm still navigating, and obviously as, you know, a father and a husband, my girls are challenging me and who I am every day, and they're making me a better man every day. So I will say I'm still going through that process, but I will say this, and this is what I was kind of hinting at in the last question. It didn't click for me about like changing out kind of these thoughts that had been conditioned in my brain, you know, beliefs about myself. I didn't start changing those until I got closer with my walk with God. Listen, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I'm not going to sit up here and try to say that anybody should, you know, I'm not trying to pour religion down anybody's throat, right? That's not the case here. But I'm just saying for me specifically, when I got connected with the true essence of who Jesus Christ was, right? And what love truly was, then I was able to, in some ways, like forgive myself for being things that I didn't want to be, but then also realize like there's this higher power, higher being that knows who I truly am, right? Behind all the facade, behind all the performance, and still loves me for who I am. And that spoke more to what I had been searching and seeking for, right? This affirmation and this validation, that spoke more to that than anything had ever done before, right? And I've been in a field where 80,000 people are screaming my name, right? That's a high that not many people get to experience. And yes, is very, very addicting. The only thing that overtook that was my connection with Jesus Christ. And I'm only saying that, again, not to force religion down anybody's throat, but to say that that's my journey. That's where I've had to come to get to a healthier, more solid place. And I'm still on that journey as we speak.
And if I hear you right, what you're saying is that it was God and Jesus that grounded you. And finding that groundation, you still found that same high. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I would even say that that high was, it surpassed it, right? And the reason being is it's not because of the adulation of about 80,000 fans, but it's the internal understanding and really this internal peace, right? It's like, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to do things that I'm not proud of. And, you know, there's going to be things that people look at me for and I may feel embarrassed by or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, Jesus knows who I am and he knows my true intent and he knows the man that I'm trying to be, not only for myself, but for my wife and for my daughters. And that's really all that matters, right?
That's it.
And there's such a peace and a security wrapped around that honestly, I really can't explain it in words. It's just an internal feeling that you feel. And I know, Chris, we spoke about this in our one-on-ones before. It's just something you know. And that confidence, right? That confidence that then propels me to do whatever I want to do in life without any barriers to that, because I feel confident that I've got this something behind me that won't let me fail. And when I say fail, I don't necessarily mean like fail in the job title or in the project we're building, right? I mean fail as a human. That's what I mean by that. And I think that's what we're all, in some ways, shape or form, that's what we're all seeking, right? Is validation and affirmation for who we are. Truly what it is love for who we are, for who we truly are. Jesus was the only source of, an abundant source for me for that. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And that kind of transitions to the next thing about, and then it starts with growing up, but to where you are now, expectations from others put on you, external sources. I think transitioning to the expectations we put on ourselves that I think far surpass what anybody else can put on us. How did you, or still working on it, what has been your path as far as dealing with those expectations and putting them to a reasonable, achievable level?
Still working on it. You said it, like nobody has higher expectations, especially for us that are highly competitive folks. Nobody has a higher expectation than we put on ourselves, right? And so when I was transitioning out of the NFL, like to your point, there's just this level of that you reach, and whatever the transition is, you expect it to have that same level of interaction and whatever it may be. And that just has not been the case, and so that has been a really hard learning lesson for me as well. But it's been beneficial for me because, number one, it's humbling in a lot of ways. But number two, like I like to learn. And so it's forcing me to get back to a starting point, ground zero, if you will, and build back up. And I really enjoy that part of it, that journey. But that initial part was a struggle for me, really, I guess, giving myself realistic expectations, right?
Still working on that part.
Yeah, still working on that part. Yeah, it's a journey for sure.
And how do you manage? Because I know your optimum operating level is super high, and everybody that you worked around for the last 20 years of your life or more has also been very high. Now, transitioning out of the NFL, and we'll talk about the service stuff as well. I think it's very similar. It's apples to apples, in my opinion. You're operating on a certain level, and you jump out of military service or the NFL. How do you manage and temper down your expectations of what others do? Because they're not of that same, they don't have that same self-drive a lot of times, that self-motivation. They're doing it for the paycheck. It's a job. It's not a part of who they are. How do you kind of bring those things together?
Yeah, it's just tailoring your expectations towards who that person is and what that person needs, right? So it's the same thing that I talked about in terms of, truly wanting to be seen and valued for who I am. So these teams that I'm a part of now, I try to instill that in our culture. There are some things that I'm motivated by that they may not necessarily be motivated by, but as the leader of the team, my job is to figure out what that motivation is for them. right? And then speak to that, and then highlight the fact that they are a part of a team, and that we can't do this individually. We have to go and do this collectively together, right?
Yeah.
So that is something I'm still working on, but I think the balance for me is that, through this transition, I really had to take a hard look and reflect on myself and look at myself as a flawed human being, right? And if I'm being honest, like, that was really hard, because that world and that realm, which I know some of you can understand, like, you put yourself on a pedestal. You kind of have to. You have to. That's the way we survive in some of these arenas, right? You have to think of yourself as, like, I'm invincible, and the person in front of me, they're just in front of me. I'm going to go through them, and they're just an obstacle for me to get to my next goal, right? I really had to take a hard look at myself and realize, like, first off, that's not true about me, right? Learning again what I'm not, but then two, that, like, everybody has their history and their context for who they are as a person and why they are the way that they are. And the closer I get to them as a person and build a relationship with them and understanding that, the more I can motivate them to do whatever it is that they want to do, or to be a part of our team. That's what I'm learning now in real time. And I feel really good about it, because I'm getting great feedback about that. But more so than anything, it's teaching me valuable lessons about myself, right? So I'm really appreciative of that journey right now.
Awesome. I'm going to try to wrap this up in a few more questions here. So give other people, I want to be mindful of your time and make sure that we get you done on your time, noon. But I have this formula that I kind of live by. It's you plus vulnerability equals authenticity. You and those three things together makes you credible. And then you end up with trust out of those things. And so with all that stuff that the journey is really kind of what you articulated there, my little formula. Where did you find the ability to be vulnerable? Because it really doesn't exist in a lot of different ways. We're told that it's weak to be vulnerable, but I actually think it shows a tremendous amount of character, and it shows a tremendous amount of strength. And again, I said it before recording, and I'll say it now that we are. That's what made me love you, bro, is your vulnerability. You didn't even say but 2 words, but watching you in a moment made me love you. The vulnerability you were able to show in front of all those people, because it's just who you were in that moment. How did you find that, or what was that point in your life to be vulnerable that you were able to then take that gamble on you to be successful going out?
Yeah, I can't take any credit for that. That was all my wife, and we struggled. And Chris, I remember when we talked about this. Like, my wife and I, we struggled at the beginning of our relationship, right? And again, a lot of it had to do with me, just immature, idolizing myself, like, just, all the negative and unhealthy things that I was doing at that time. But my wife was really, really incredible in giving me grace through that. And she also said, like, before we got married, she's like, we got to go to marriage counseling. And I was really reluctant to do it at first, because that's just kind of, a lot of us experience this in our culture. Being vulnerable, like you just said, that's being weak, right? Like, I don't need to go talk to somebody, like, but my wife forced me to do that. And it was one of the best decisions I made in my life, because as I started opening up and being more vulnerable, then my wife became more secure, right? And I could see her opening up and being more, she felt like she was being loved and being cherished just because I was being vulnerable. So my wife is the reason for that, right? And yes, I was very hesitant and very resistant to it. What I recognize is that the more vulnerable I am, the closer I was to my authentic self. And that felt really, really good. And then as I was doing that in more spaces and felt more comfortable to do that in more spaces, that's when, I started getting really, really great people surrounding me, right? Like, obviously, Chris, you and I met, and you spoke to, you said just my authenticity. Honestly, I didn't know it in the moment, right? I was just trying to be myself and be as present as I could in that moment, but you recognize it. And now look, we're here today, right? And so I can't take any credit for it. That was my wife. And I remember a counselor, and I was pushing heavy against it. But we were in the counseling session, and my counselor said, conflict is the price of something deeper. And, it wasn't necessarily conflict between my wife and I, it was a conflict of me wrestling with the conditioning that I had in my brain, right? Like, if I had never wrestled with that, I wouldn't get to a deeper layer of who I am. And so that conflict, that wrestling with that is the price of something deeper. And I'm so grateful that my wife forced me to do it, because, we have 3 kids now and a healthy marriage, and at least I think a healthy marriage.
As healthy as any marriage could be, right? It ain't
Yeah.
perfect, but it's healthy.
Yeah, but I'm in a very good place. And a lot of it started because she forced me to be more vulnerable.
And so within that, what I hear you saying is a support system. And it's important to surround yourself with a support system, not a bunch of echo chamber bubbles.
Amen. Amen. I was recently on a podcast talking about a former teammate of mine, speaking about, like, what would you say to him in the struggle that he's going through? And I said, like, I just hope he has the right people around him that are reminding him who he is, like the truth of who he is, and holding him accountable to that. Because, to your point, if you're around folks that are just yes people, right, that aren't being honest with you about, if you say that you want to be a good person and you have certain morals, if they're not holding you accountable to those morals, like, you're unstable and you'll just be tossed in the wind as challenges come your way. And so I recognize the value of having great mentors and advisors and friends and family and your support system around you that, yes, speak life into you when you forget who you are.
I love it, man. That's that's gospel. And I'll ask this one last question. A transition plan. When do you think, because obviously, especially in the NFL and pro athletes, and I would say, law enforcement and military as well, generally due to injuries, sometimes performance, your career can be cut short, much shorter than what you ever thought. When do you think is an appropriate plan or an appropriate time to start thinking about life after, or having a parallel path that you have some sort of exit plan on to help ease that transition?
So let me start off by saying I have no idea. No idea to the answer to that. But I will say that, and this may not be the right answer, but I think you should do it at the start, right? At the very beginning of whatever journey you're taking on. You should have thoughts in your mind about, what am I really passionate about? And I don't think, maybe it's the reason why I'm hesitant to say this is because I do feel like, especially in the NFL, like, you have to be so singularly focused to have success and to thrive and also to survive in that realm, which I know is the case in military and law enforcement. I think a lot of times we get kind of stuck in that mentality of being so singularly focused because we have to. I would say that the aspect of, like, not necessarily having an exit strategy or backup plan, but really understanding who you are and understanding what your passions are outside of what you do for work, right? I think those things get us closer to who we really are. And so when we have to go through a transition, we've kind of already done that groundwork of knowing foundationally who we are and what we are, look forward to, or gets us excited. And that way you can kind of head in that direction once you're done. For me, I didn't know, right? And I felt like I was prepared for this. Like, I had my support system. I had kind of some ideas of different opportunities. I didn't know exactly what my passion was because, again, I'd been playing since I was 6 years old, and I never took the time to explore that. Right. But I thought I was well prepared for this, but I wasn't. It was 8 months of really, really hard mental depression, all of it that I had to get through just to get to a place of, like, okay, I'm good. I'm here. Like, okay, now let's start looking at other things, right? So I guess in short, my answer is to start right away, but not necessarily to have a backup plan, just to do the work of knowing who you are as a person.
And then just kind of not having a plan necessarily, but having that thought process of other things that you're passionate about that you can do outside of.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, man. I could ask you 1,000 more questions that I think that you have so much insight to share, but I want to share the floor here. So let's open this up. You good with taking some questions, Doug?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So thank you again for all of that. And we'll open this up. Michelle, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the talk. I think that was very inspirational. You kind of touched on 8 months of some depression and stuff like that after the transition, I gotta wonder, I wanted to ask you because for my transition, I didn't have a choice. I was actually in denial for a while, and it took me a good solid 6 months of therapy to finally admit, okay, I can't do my job anymore because of the PTSD. So now I'm facing the let's find your next chapter, but there's so much fear and anxiety because I planned on being a dispatcher for my whole life.
Yeah.
Did you face that, any fears or anxieties? And if so, like how did you fight through that?
Yeah, I mean, oh, man, I remember one day I woke up and my wife, we were, my daughter had just been born. And so I woke up and we were doing something with my daughter. And my wife looked over at me and she says, "You okay?" And I sort of said, "I'm just really, really sad. And I don't know why." And I just like started crying. And, I'm not a crier. And so this was a whole different realm for me to like have my emotions feel so out of control. And so, yeah, I was dealing with anxiety. I was dealing with depression. I was dealing with, all of the things that folks talk about, they think about and talk about to themselves in those moments. I was going through that, right? And even things that I'm still working through admitting with myself now, because it was a really hard time for me. But how I got through that was number one, counseling. I can't stress counseling enough, right? And I say counseling, that doesn't mean that all counselors are good. You got to find a good counselor, right? My wife was incredible. So having a support system, somebody who genuinely loves you and wants to see you do well, right? Regardless of, they have no hidden agenda. So having that support system. And then again, if I'm being really, really honest, like I had to get back in my Bible, my word, right? And let's say that the story of Jesus Christ is not true. Let's just say that for the purpose of this conversation, right? Regardless of that, the story itself of a person sacrificing themselves for the betterment of another person, right? But then also knowing like this person is treating them harshly, like the people are treating them harshly, and they still say that I still love you, right? Like I went through that. Like I was treating during that really hard time, like I wasn't a great husband to my wife, but she still loved me, right? And I hadn't seen, or at least I hadn't recognized that level of true love until then. And that changed my life. But I wasn't able to recognize what it truly was until I read it in the Bible, right? And there's a specific passage that says what love is, right? I fail at that every day. But that's also the reason why I believe the story of Jesus Christ is true, is because we fail at trying to be a loving husband, a loving parent, whatever it may be, and we fail at it. But that Jesus said, "I love you despite that," right? Despite your failures. And so that was really powerful for me. Yeah, that's the best I got for you. Of
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that.
course.
Sarah.
You know what? Janet has her hand up. Is
Oh.
that?
Yep, go ahead, Janet. You could go.
That's okay. Sarah could have gone. I'm not going to jump on you, Matt. Anyways, thank you, Doug, so much for sharing. As someone that was married to a police officer before joining into the police force, which was a transition in itself because the shoe was on the other foot, I'd get a phone call at work and saying, it's lonely at home with no one home. I said, yeah, I know that. But I love the saying, conflict is the price of something deeper. That is, it really is. When I was fortunate, and I say this in a way that, just to say some things happened, car accident, PTSD, other injuries and stuff that happened to me, which was a blessing. I knew I needed help and I got it. But my husband loved his work. He wanted to stay for 35 years. And then something happened with management. He got mad and he walked off the job right then. 10 years. He never got any counseling, wouldn't even talk about it, not one person he worked with phoned him or anything. And so I've been on both sides of that. And the communications is so important. And I think what really helped us is when we were married about 10 years, we did something called Marriage Encounter. And it was a weekend away, and just to build on our communications.
Yeah.
And that, you know, if you're arguing, hold hands. You know, you both can want the same thing, but you just communicate different. You know, when you can realize that you both want the same thing, and that's one of the things that came out of it. But grieving, you know, I the time to take my retirement. I got healthier and chose my time. Les didn't. And that grieving period, and I think everybody has to be aware that it has to be the loss of a person. Grief is a loss of our lifestyle. Grief is a loss of so many things.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's one of the things, you know. And when we go to that place, and planning is hard, right? When you think you're going to do a career forever, but go back to the passion. What got Les out of it was he went back. When I met him, he wasn't a police officer, but he loved photography. And, you know, we went on a trip, he bought a new camera, and does that now, and he helps me with my stuff. So it's finding what did you love. And even with you said you had football from the time you were 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
What was that? What was the feeling that made you feel good? And where can you transition that into something else that you can get that feeling? Because it's the feeling, it's not necessarily what we do.
Right.
It's how it feeds us.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you, Janet. Doug, do you have time for 2 more questions, bro? I know we're about at noon.
Yeah, I got one more question because I have to hop on a work call, but yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do one more question.
Sarah, let's give this to you, please.
Okay. Oh gosh, Doug, thank you so much for coming on. I just want to tell you that I really appreciate your vulnerability. You are a light. You are leading the way. I've been doing these things for quite a few years now. People need to hear your voice because you really do show up as you. And that is what they're fighting to do. You have the courage, you have the grit, you're taking everything that made you a champion on the field, and you have the courage, the humility, and the groundedness to use it on this journey. I'm so grateful to hear. I want to also say that I am not in any of these arenas that I actually set up, which is funny, the way that I've, grown up. I've not been in football. I've not been military. I've not been law enforcement, none of those things. Somehow I ended up here, but you know what? We meet through vulnerability. That's where we connect as human beings. And I see your power in that. I'm not at all surprised when you started sharing your faith. I'm like, yeah, okay, there we go. I'm super proud of you, Doug. I just want to say that as a new friend. I felt teary. I'm rooting you on. You've got a new pep rally over here because we need to hear your voice. People need to see your example. Thank you. Chris, again, awesome job. Thank you.
Hey, it was a pleasure. Thank you for letting me do this. I appreciate you all.
Doug, I appreciate you so much, man. And again, your vulnerability, like Sarah just said, needs to be shared out there so that more people can be that way. And then maybe there's less suffering and there's better success at transition with that vulnerability. So thanks, brother, man. I love you, man.
Too, homie.